All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'd like to introduce Greg Longo and Brian Gardiner. Greg is a senior threat analyst on the JASC Special Ops team with over a decade of cybersecurity experience in both the public and private sectors. Prior to joining JASC, Greg was the global threat management lead at Covestro and held a number of technical positions at CERT. Pardon me 1 second. Sorry about that. So where was I? Held a number of technical positions at CERT, part of the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon. Greg has also been with the U.S. Air Force and National Guard since 2002 as a cyberspace operations officer, and is currently the commander of the 166th Communications Flight. Along the way, Greg has earned a Master's of Science degree from Carnegie Mellon, along with a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Pittsburgh, and a Master of Business Administration degree from Wright State University. Brian has been a senior threat analyst on the JASC Special Ops team. Brian has over 8 years of experience in cybersecurity, with previous positions which include vulnerability analyst and security engineer across both public and private sectors. Prior to JASC, Brian worked as a senior incident response analyst with IBM X-Force, IRIS at Aetna, and as the information security advisor of the security data analytics team. Brian earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Pittsburgh and Master of Science degree from Carnegie Mellon University. So, with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you guys, and let's rock and roll.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Zach. Can anybody hear us okay? Excellent. So thank you for, Zach, thanks for having us out. Thank you, everybody, for showing up to this talk. Threat hunting out of the gate with Windows logs. It's not a super creative title, but I think you get the gist. I know we're getting you right after lunch, so the food coma is going to set in. Folks might be a couple beers in, a couple drinks in, but appreciate you hanging with us. We'll get through some early introductory material, and then we'll really dig into some meat of the presentation here today. So as Zach mentioned, Brian and I both have spent some time in industry and as well as sort of the academia FFRDC land with CMU and the CERT program. So that means we know probably 50% of the people out here. We've got some relationship with everybody, but we're excited to be here. So you may be sitting there wondering, why am I here? How many folks, real quick, this is the only audience participation I'll ask for, have active threat hunting programs within your organizations? Okay. How many of you guys that are not doing threat hunting have at least heard of threat hunting or understand the general concept of threat hunting? Good. Okay. So for the most part, pretty much everybody. This is really meant to be an introductory talk, so I want to make sure we set the stage for that, right? We're going to get into some details about what you can do with Windows logs and things like that, but we're really going to start at the very beginning, lay the foundation, talk about what threat hunting is, why it's really a thing for organizations these days, and then explain to folks how you can get started with minimal effort really using Windows logs, which I'm guessing 99.9% of the folks out there have Windows logs in your environment. You're probably already collecting those logs. How do you make use of those in a threat hunting kind of capacity? Quick roadmap of where we're going to go. So we'll talk a little bit about, again, what is threat hunting? Why is it important? Why is it a thing? What are the things you need to consider when you're building a threat hunting program? How do you get started? And then we'll really dive into the data. Brian's going to go through a whole bunch of Windows logs and a couple of use cases that'll be really interesting. There's a lot of graphics on the slides, but hopefully these become available to folks afterwards, and then you can reference those when you're back at your organizations. So before we get into what threat hunting actually is and how you're going to get started, let's talk a little bit about why threat hunting. Why did this discipline come about? What were the revelations and the recognition that really drove this new kind of thing in our field, right? And a lot of that comes back to the realization that the adversaries that we're up against are becoming increasingly advanced and sophisticated in what they're doing, that our technology landscape is constantly evolving, and what that means is that as we adopt new technology, our attack surface is constantly expanding, and we're always playing catch-up there. It is an arms race between the defenders and the adversaries, but the cards aren't completely stacked against us as defenders, and we'll explain why. So this should resonate with most folks, right? There's, out there in your organizations, I'm sure you've got some constellation of security controls. Those controls could be administrative or operational kinds of controls that are really driven by humans in the loop. So think of your policies and your procedures and your separation of duties and those kinds of things. You also have technical controls, so your firewall rules, your proxy rules, your ACLs, two-factor authentication, all these kinds of technical controls that are in place. And those controls, whether they're administrative, operational, technical, they exist on the spectrum of your endpoints and your network, right? So you put all these things together, and this is what you use to protect your organizations. But the adversaries follow this notion of the cyber kill chain that Lockheed Martin coined in 2011. Everyone aware of the cyber kill chain? Pretty common, right? And so you've got these controls that are in place, and I call those exploitable gaps because that's what the adversary is going to be targeting. But these are all the opportunities that the adversary has to find a hole in one of those controls that you've put in place. And at every stage along the kill chain that we have here, whether it's recon, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, all along the line, you're going to have controls in place, and there's going to be opportunities for adversaries to discover vulnerabilities there and exploit those vulnerabilities, right? Whether it's recon and you've got employees who are posting too much information on LinkedIn, weaponization, if they're grabbing stuff from your websites and they're weaponizing PDF documents that you may be hosting out there, things like that. There's all kinds of opportunities for the adversary to take advantage of the information that we have out there. So security is not a zero-sum game. It's an overused analogy. You may have used it yourself, but the idea of defending a castle, right? Defenders, we operate sometimes within some artificially constrained bounds. And I mentioned that, the cards aren't completely stacked against us. You hear the phrase or the saying that, as defenders, we've got a tough job. We've got to defend this entire, cyber key terrain that we have, right? We've got all these systems that we're trying to keep track of, inventory that we can't wrap our arms around, IT networks, OT networks, things like that. And the adversary just needs to find one way to get in, right? And that's all. They just need to find one exploit that works, and they're in. Meanwhile, we've got to defend all this stuff. That's not exactly true, right? Because as defenders, we should have the upper hand in knowing our environment, right? Idealistically. We should understand what we have, what's vulnerable, what we need to protect, how to protect it. And the adversary, yes, they do need to find an exploit, but they also need to put all the pieces together to get that exploit into your environment and to maintain some form of stealth in order to carry out whatever it is they want to do, right? So they've got a pretty challenging job ahead of them too. And as defenders, we need to detect one thing along those lines, right? We need to find the spear phishing email, right? Or the piece of malware that's beaconing out for C2, right? Or something, and we're onto that adversary, and then it becomes an IR engagement and an investigation from that point on. So I wouldn't say that the cards are completely stacked against us. It is a back and forth, but as defenders, we're not completely hamstrung. So we put all the controls in place, but when an attacker breaches your network, the fundamental thing is your controls have failed somewhere, right? You've got preventative controls that are in place, and again, think of those technologies that are out there to stop an attack or stop a breach from actually happening, from getting in the front door. Your email filters and your firewall rules and all those sorts of things, right? Those are supposed to stop the adversary at the front door, and then you've got detective controls. So you're running a SIM, right? And you've got other technology that should alert you when something does get in and fires off. So an attacker gets in, these controls have failed somewhere along the line. The punchline to all of this is, right, that your controls will eventually fail, right? That's the environment that we're in now. We're in this sort of realm of assume breach kind of world. again, which is sort of where threat hunting kind of came from. But your controls will likely fail. Attackers will get in and they'll probably stay there, right? Average dwell time for an attacker used to be in the mid 200 plus days. Just read a recent report that was down to just over 100 days. So good on us. We're detecting the adversary a lot quicker, but still that's over 3 months of an adversary in your network, which gives them plenty of time to orient themselves, to move laterally, to move from their beachhead to a complete foothold to something else in your environment, to do recon and get what they need. So over 100 days is still a significant dwell time that we're up against. So threat hunting. Again, a lot of you guys are doing it. Pretty much everyone has heard of it. It came about, a while ago, over a decade ago or so, and it's really started to pick up here in the last number of years. So when we talk about threat hunting, what are we actually talking about? When folks get into it, and we can thank vendor hype for a lot of this, is you've got a list of IP addresses or you've got a list of hashes, and you start searching all your logs for that information, for those indicators, right? Indicator searching or indicator hunting. It's not exactly what we're talking about when we talk about hunting, threat hunting, but it is an easy place to get started. So we don't want folks to get confused and think, okay, so when I'm talking about hunting, I'm talking about a malicious IP or a hash that now I just go off and search for in my environment. We're looking for really more of detecting the adversary's behavior in our environment, and not so much these atomic indicator type things. So as I mentioned, the first reference that you can find on the internet tracing back threat hunting back in 2009, the cyber defensive community for sure has really gained a lot from what's come out of the DoD and the military. Some friends at NSA in the vulnerability analysis and operations branch published this slide during a red team, blue team presentation, and this was sort of the first indication of this concept of hunt, right? And the idea of actively going out and searching for adversaries within your network. So, just a little tidbit, interesting reading. So what is hunting when we talk about it? Threat hunting is merely a means by which you as an analyst will deliberately and proactively go out to search for the presence of compromise, malicious activity, suspicious activity, something that you don't want in your environment, that's been missed by your existing security controls. The easiest way to think of threat hunting in my mind is as sort of a form of proactive IR. Really, you're taking it upon yourself to go off and find this adversary that you're presuming is already in your network and is taking a foothold. And then it's retrospective, obviously. So you're not going to go back over a year's worth of time likely, but within the last 30 days or 45 days, look for a specific kind of behavior that the adversary exhibits is what we mean when we talk about threat hunting. So threat hunting is a hypothesis-oriented, process-driven kind of activity. What we've laid out is just 5 notional steps to the threat hunting process. So starting out with a hypothesis, something that you want to find. That's really the crux of threat hunting. You've got an idea in mind. This is what I'm going to go search for, and I'm going to go off and look for that. Then you need to decide, well, based on what it is I want to look for, what data do I need? Do I have that data? How do I collect that data? So you go through this sort of data analysis kind of phase. Then once you go off and you collect all those pieces of data, you're doing a validation of your hypothesis. Did I find the threat that I was looking for? If not, why not? Do they not exist? Or did I not look in the right place? And it's sort of an iterative process where you'll continue to cycle back and make sure that you're looking at everything that you need to be looking at. And then you always want to be improving upon that process. So find ways to not conduct manual hunts over and over, but can you automate? Can you improve upon what you're doing? And finally, you want to make sure that whatever it is that you have done through your hunting engagement, your hunting operation, you have documented in some way, some wiki or something, so that you're able to retain that knowledge, go back to it and reference it in the future, and build upon this sort of knowledge base that you've gained through hunting operations. So how do you establish the hypothesis where we start? MITRE's done a tremendous amount of work in mapping attacker TTPs. So the MITRE attack framework is an awesome place to start, a good reference for how adversaries have been known to operate in environments. Their tactics, their tools, their techniques, everything that they're doing, this is an awesome reference. But hunting is not an exact science, and there's a lot of different approaches, right? So you could take the approach, I know that I have Windows logs, so what can I find in Windows logs, okay? And that's sort of more of a data-centric or a data-driven kind of approach, right? You've got a certain piece of data, what can you find in that data? Or you can take another approach where you say, I understand this particular adversary, or I read a threat report and I know that they exhibit this kind of behavior. So then you say, well, how do I detect that behavior, and what logs do I need, or what logs do I need to go get? And that's sort of more of a threat intel-driven kind of approach, right? So you can look at it from a couple different perspectives. What we're going to talk about here, or what we propose here, is that most everybody has Windows logs. So we're going to do a combination of, let's take those Windows logs that we know you have, that we know you can collect, that we know you can go through. Let's map that against what we know about some adversaries, like say, scheduled tasks as a persistence mechanism, right? Pretty common. So let's go through our Windows logs and look for scheduled tasks, right? Pretty low-hanging fruit, see what we can identify, see if there's anything odd that stands out. So that's a great place to start, and that's a lot of what Brian's going to be talking through. And so building a plan. So once you've got all this stuff in mind, then you need to build a plan, right? Again, going back to understanding the adversary, understanding what data you have or can get access to, whether it's from the endpoint, whether it's from the network. Are there things that you can only detect on an endpoint? What kind of adversary activity is going to generate network artifacts that you can then pull, right? And again, what do you have? What do you need to get? You go through your hunt, you do your investigation, you do various kinds of analytics on that data. You've got to do your interpretation of what it means, right? It's not always going to be black and white, cut and dry. You're going to have to interpret what you get back and whether or not that means something to you and your organization. Again, kind of goes back to the idea that we as defenders do have the upper hand and that we have the best context of our environment, right? There's going to be some expert analysis or interpretation that you do with the data based on what you know of the environment. You may see things like TeamViewer in your environment, right? Or remote access tools. That might be suspicious. It might be completely legitimate in another organization, right? So there's no blanket, one size fits all. If you find this is bad. But it becomes an iterative process that you learn more about your environment as you go through it. And then again, the documentation, of course. So I'm going to pass it over to Brian. Brian's going to talk through some Windows logs and some interesting use cases.
All right, is everyone still awake? Good in here? Okay, because I'm about to put you to sleep. So I'm just kidding. Data is awesome. I've worked in a variety of different roles throughout my years here, and really what you can get from that is a different perspective in threat hunting. Whether you're a sysadmin and you can only get Windows logs, or whether you've got a full data lake, whole Hadoop stack, and you're logging absolutely everything in the internet-connected fridge, you can really break down sort of where you want to be with your threat hunting. You don't have to have all network data, all logging, everything. It can be very specific to your role at your company or the maturity of your company. It just depends really what you have to work with. So we're going to talk about a couple of campaigns really quickly, and then we'll dive into a bunch of the data that we need to do this stuff. So Turla, this one's awesome. Pretty much the reason I put this on here, you can see like they've done a lot of stuff with the military, a lot of stuff with government entities, but they've been switching recently to a lot of PowerShell-based activity. And this is absolutely nothing new. Everyone knows about PowerShell. Although I was blown away, though, that they are actually using the profile to maintain persistence. I don't think I've seen that before, but it's a really interesting technique. Of course, their payload, too, is PowerStallion. And there's a really good article on this that you can read. It'll give you a lot of the IOCs. You can really dig into this tooling and kind of see what's occurring with that. But the interesting point here is when you start to look at these threat actors or these campaigns and sort of the tooling that they're utilizing, a lot of them have been going more and more and more open source. You're not seeing as much custom stuff. You may from a couple of adversaries, but a lot of this stuff is you can just go to GitHub and pull it down and do work with that. It's pretty impressive. And then this campaign, Frankenstein, this is my absolute favorite. I think it's the funniest name in the world. Like, I just imagine some like SOC guy running into management being like, oh my God, we've been breached by Frankenstein, and the management being like, dude, are you serious? Like, is that Mary Shelley Frankenstein, or what are you talking about? I just think it's hilarious. But one of the things that's really interesting about this group is that they've completely abandoned their own tooling. They are going to GitHub, pulling down what everyone has already done. They're taking that information, tweaking it a little bit, and utilizing that. So like when you start talking about attribution, like primarily one of the best ways you can do this to a threat group is you take apart the code of the tooling that they're utilizing, and that's how you identify them. So what are we going to say now? Like attribution's Harmjoy, who invented like Empire? Like it's not going to fly anymore. So it's going to start becoming a lot more interesting when you start to play the attribution game with some of this stuff. And then all of these tools too, you can just go immediately, like FruityC2, Empire, they're out there. You can start working with them. And then the persistence mechanism here as well. So they're utilizing WinUpdate, so it's one of the scheduled tasks that they use. This is really interesting as well. Nothing new, it's something that's definitely out there. But I just thought that this campaign was extremely interesting because they've actually broken away from custom tooling and they're just utilizing open source tools that are out there. All right, so now down to it. Required log sources. Almost everyone in here, I'm assuming, is a Windows shop. So you have your default logging. This is stuff that is turned on by default. You have it, everyone sees it, everyone looks at it. There's a ton of information within there. I'm not gonna lie, you can do a lot of stuff with that. You can detect lateral movement, account creation, etc. There's a lot you can do with that. What I'm more interested in is the actual advanced auditing. And then the reason for this is a lot of this comes from probably doing IR for the past year and a half and my current position and just working in companies and seeing sort of what they're doing. I can think of one case where one company actually had these logs. Just about every other company that I worked with didn't have any of this. I know you're kind of probably thinking like, well, isn't there an EDR that picks up all of this stuff? There's a few out there that do, but you still need this logging in your own environment. There's a lot that you can do with this. So the reasons for this advanced auditing, it's fileless attacks. PowerShell is everywhere. Living off the land, persistence detection, all of that stuff can be done with these logging sources implemented. You don't need $1 million tool in your environment. You have the tooling in there. You just need a GPO change to set this up, get the information flowing. And I know too, everyone's like, oh man, Sysmon's like the hottest thing in the world. It's sweet, I love it, but to be honest with you, from what I've seen with this and the customers that have implemented it, 99% of them have just gone Swift security, pull down, do it. No one looks at the configuration file. No one understands that, he just updated that, but it's been a year. How do you know he didn't leave something out that's able to get into your environment? How is he understanding your environment better than you guys are? So through doing this advanced logging, there's a ton you can do with this. You can start building out the whitelist that you need to put into that configuration file for Sysmon. So it's a really good beginner step to start there. Once you have this down, you understand what's occurring in your environment, then move to Sysmon, then get the extra logging, get all the additional functionality that you want once you understand, where you live. All right, this is guaranteed. I know people ask this all the freaking time, volumes, because data is expensive depending on how you have it. So this is just baseline, 1 month, 1,000 machines, solid Windows enterprise environment. This is kind of the numbers that you're looking at. So 4688 process creation, that's the biggest one. It's 147 million logs. Keep in mind here, they have failure enabled as well as command line logging. So you could cut failure out of this. You could reduce the volume. You can get rid of 4103 module logging for PowerShell and just utilize script block logging. There's ways around this. You can play with this stuff. But this is just kind of an understanding. I just wanted to show everyone that you can work kind of within your budget, turn on what you need to, maybe just deploy out to the machines you deem critical, kind of see how the logging flows, and then go from there. All right, so this is the biggest thing. I don't know why environments don't have this. Like, real quick show of hands, who's logging this right now and knows like in their environment? Okay, yeah, that's okay. If there's one thing from this talk like you take away today, it's just go implement this. Like, put this in your environment, and the key with this is you have to enable command line process auditing. This essentially gives you the command line that is run for just about anything in your environment. So if you think of process creation, this is taking the actual process that's occurring in the environment. If you run a command, its parent process is command.exe. Command line's logged. You have all of that. It is so rich for hunting, it's ridiculous. And even just looking to see, like what administrators are doing, like what's occurring in the environment, it is definitely the event ID to ensure that you have within your environment. So I did this for all of them. We're only going to go through a couple of event IDs, but I put this on here so when we share the slides, you know exactly where to go, how to set this up, the screenshot that it looks like. When I was searching for some of this stuff, it's kind of difficult to find like a good resource that has all of this. And I know everyone's like, go to Microsoft's site. They don't have everything really well laid out for advanced auditing. I'll be the first to admit that. So this is just a way you can come back, look at the slides and be like, give it to like your systems administrators, look at it, be like, hey, we need this GPO put in. This is where you do it. This is what it looks like when you're within group policy. And then this is the actual configuration file for enabling process creation 4688. So this is where like I have success and failure checked. If you were worried about log volume, you would uncheck failure here. Just run success, go from there. This is the actual command line configuration. This is the most important piece to enabling this. So you have to have this configured. All right, and then what you can do with it. So just like searching through logs, you're gonna start to see, I hope, oh yeah, you guys can see that, sweet. You're gonna start to see command lines that are like really ridiculously interesting. When you start running stuff, like whether you're doing this in a home lab or you're in your environment, you can start correlating all of this data, start looking through it and see. I mean, this is a no-brainer. You can immediately see the huge blob of obfuscation. You can see like the -STA, the W1, it's definitely an Empire stager. The no-op, like this is the power that you can get from it. So by looking at that process command line, if you have not enabled that with this logging, you will not see this. So like the log loses a lot of value immediately. That's why it's so critical that you actually enable that. So here's another one, another malicious PowerShell. This one's utilizing a service creation, and then it's pointing to command.exe, PowerShell's downloading stage, another stager from an external IP. So you're gonna start to see these types of malicious commands in your environment. This is stuff that like you wouldn't normally ever be able to find, depending on like the tooling and the controls that you have in place. This is free. This is in Microsoft. You can turn this on and do this immediately. All right, my other favorite one. So I know there was a talk earlier this morning. The guy went over this pretty well. It's awesome. How many people that are in here like offensively utilize this technique? Can you like raise your hands like for pen testing, red teaming, anything? All right, no one wants to give that away. Okay, I'm telling you right now as a blue teamer, start looking for this because it's just insane what you can do with this technique. So the breakdown to this is any single user can run this. This isn't, you don't have to be an administrator to type this command out and run this. We find it all of the time. A really good example of this, one of the customers I'd worked with, we turned on 4688, we turned on the process command line logging, and what popped up is you can see on the bottom there, the redsurf32exe, it's like the second command line to the server, ASER, whatever, .ru. So that had been running in their environment on 15 machines for over a year, unchecked. They had no idea. What that is actually a piece of, or a remnant from the old Andromeda campaign from 2017. So the domain was definitely blown, but it's one of those things that they had no idea. And yes, they had an EDR, they had all kinds of stuff. It didn't relate any of this information until we started digging through the logs. So it's one of those things that you really, really need to enable this event ID. Start taking a look at it, start seeing what's occurring. You're gonna start to see probably remnants in your environment from past campaigns that you just didn't have the controls or the tooling in place to notice. And the Carbon Black article is amazing on that. It's a little bit dated, but this is still a used technique. We still find it all the time. All right, so other interesting behavior that you can do with this event ID. This is a huge one in SANS. Like if you've taken like a forensics course there, it's pretty much you can look at the process launch location. So when you think about like Windows system processes, you think of like CSRSS, like service host, LSAS, WinInit, there's tons. But like a really good way to check this is if those aren't running from system 32, you've got an issue. Like if that's running from like app data temp or something like that, there's definitely something occurring. So you can write rules based on this to look at non-standard launch path locations. It's immediate win. You can see what's occurring right there. Some of the other stuff you can do, you can just start searching for command lines, like known things that adversaries use, red team uses, or just want to see what's occurring within your own environment. The who am I, like that's been used a billion times, but it's still a giveaway because you know who you are on your system. If that's running your environment, chances are someone shouldn't be there. Netstat, same thing, looking for listening ports, open ports, etc. And then you're going to see stuff like this, like the net services, pschedule. There's a lot of malicious command lines that are out there that do a lot of different things that are pretty bad. Turning off all the firewall profiles, and then just the large chunks of obfuscated code. You don't have to know what the command line does, but there's probably no one in your environment that's going to run obfuscated code. That would just be weird. It just wouldn't make sense. Okay, so next event ID, 4698, scheduled tasks. Not as important as process creation, but this is a huge one. I mean, how many adversaries, how many campaigns and groups are out there that utilize scheduled tasks as a persistence mechanism? How do you guys monitor those? What do you look at? Do you have something that says like, hey, this was created in our environment, this is legit or this isn't? There's tons of these out there. When you also enable some of these advanced audit policy rules will also enable a bunch of other event IDs within this. So like you might have like scheduled task, updated, deleted, etc. I'm just talking about like the main one for now. There's still a lot of other stuff that you can do with the residual tasks or event IDs that are created as well. Okay, this is the same. So I'm just gonna skip through these. Like if you wanted to after, you could find exactly how to set these up and configure them and utilize them. And it's the same thing here as well. Log volume, uncheck failure if you want to have a little bit less. So just go into MITRE, looking at like the actual TTPs that are in there. You can see all of these groups. Every single one of them uses scheduled tasks for persistence. If you are not monitoring scheduled task creation, you are probably missing a massive chunk of this within your environment. Okay, so here's another issue. From previously, I've done this before where you start looking for scheduled tasks when you're trying to find persistence, and you go to the user's computer. This one's clean. It only has like probably like 8, but I've seen people that have hundreds, and you're like, oh my God, I can never ever figure out what each one of these does. That's a sort of a benefit to doing this and enabling this is if you have a time frame from some other indicator that's fired in your environment, you can go back and look at that time frame in the logs for this. That would be one way to do it. The other one, you're gonna have to probably start Googling a lot of stuff or praying that there's information within the scheduled task that they filled out where you can get that information and understand actually what's occurring with that task. Easiest way to do it would be like to look at the naming convention and be like, oh, this one's garbled. It's 30 characters, uppercase, lowercase. That's probably not legit. There's actually companies that do that. So you really have to kind of Google around a little bit to do that. All right, so Fin7, this is like just a current example. One of the persistence mechanisms that they utilize is they do a double scheduled task through an LNK file when it's downloaded. So the first one that you're gonna see is Intel, and then the second one is what I talked about. It's that garbly, like 8, I think it's 12 characters actually, uppercase and lowercase, no numbers. But you'll start to see this stuff. You could start taking a look at these, and if you start logging this, what you could do is you could just do a weekly task to do like maybe a count or a sort, depending on the tooling that you have in your environment. Just list them out. Just start looking at it. Just maybe look at the user who created it, look at the naming, and go from there. It's definitely something you should be monitoring and taking a much closer look at. This is the same thing with Frankenstein as before. They utilize Win Update, which I would never see if I was just looking through a massive, massive list of them. But it's the same thing. Like you really have to pay attention to these. You really have to understand what's occurring in your environment. And there's surprisingly, there shouldn't be as many scheduled tasks created in a Windows environment as you would think. Like a massive, massive enterprise, you might see maybe 1,000 a month, depending on how your administrators do business within the environment. It shouldn't be too bad. All right, 4697, service creation. So This is, like, I know people are going to say it. This is already in the logs. This is in the system log 7045 by default. It is. But this is, the way I rationalize this is, it's like me living in Butler and my best friend in the South Hills. We're not making that friggin' drive. Like, it doesn't matter. He could be in California. It'd be like the same thing. It's getting somebody that's a security analyst or any kind of analyst in your company. Like, how often do they dig into the system logs or the application logs? It's like probably never. So the reason that I really like this one is it forces you to look at it because now it's in the security log. All of your tools are probably ingesting just the security log. So you're gonna actually see it now. But this is just with Windows 10 and up into there. All right, so same setup, group policy, same thing here. You can also do failure. I'd recommend just doing success for this. So in the attack framework, this is the same kind of deal. You're going to have execution and you're going to have persistence. It's utilized in two different ways. So it's definitely worth taking a look at. Like, if you ever heard of like the SC command, this logs it. This will show you that. So this is just execution here. This is persistence here. I mean, this is common. All of the newest groups, a lot of the older groups, they're all utilizing this technique. If you're not logging this, you're definitely missing it. All right, so a quick example here. So this is Carbonat backdoor. I think I may have messed this up when I did it. So it's what Carbonat does is it takes a common service. It's like Russian roulette. It'll just take a common service name and it's going to append sys to it. But I thought that it deleted the actual last character of the service, and I think it does the first. So this is backwards. But you can see when services are actually created within a Windows environment, you're going to have this information. You're going to have the account name that created it, and you can take a look at it. A lot of times, I'm not going to lie, these are going to blend in so well that you're really going to have to pay attention, like just a letter off, something of that nature. Sometimes, though, you will see just basic garbage across there, and you know that that's probably going to be a malicious process that's running within your environment. All right. I hate talking about this. Everyone has done this before, but it just pains me so much. One customer in the past year and a half has PowerShell logging enabled. This is a massive tool, like for the blue team, for your offensive team, for everybody within the environment. So real quickly, how many people actually have this enabled and know that it's enabled in their environment? Okay, yeah, this is something you just have to do it. Look at all of the tooling that's out there. Look at all of the presentations that you see at like DEF CON everywhere. How are you guys catching this activity if you're not logging PowerShell? You're not catching it. So it's getting through your environment. This is the simplest logging solution that you can put into play and get wins immediately from. So there is volume issues with this as well. This can be super noisy. So if you have to pick script block logging. This is the log that you want. You do not want to go with module logging if volume is an issue. So script block logging, freaking awesome. The best log that Windows has come up with in the past couple of years would be my opinion. It captures pretty much the full command and the contents of the script. It can do a little bit of deobfuscation. It might not necessarily make the code readable to you, but enough where you can do something with it and know that something's occurring. So pretty much it shows who executed the script, when it was run, regardless of how PowerShell was executed, it ends up here. Setup, same kind of deal. That's where it is in group policy. This is where you configure it. And then examples. Empire Stager, I mean, everyone knows what Empire is. It's used by so many people, so many red teams, adversaries, actors, whatever. It's there. If you're not logging this, you are not catching this. You're not going to see this occur. So it's based on like a listener, stager, and an agent. The key giveaway here for Empire, it's the -STA, which means PowerShell is pretty much in single-threaded mode. I still have no freaking idea why they do that. If anyone knows, come find me after and tell me, because PowerShell is multi-threaded, so I don't know why they would do this. But you're going to see like the no-op for no profile with the STA and then the W1. That's a dead giveaway for Empire in your environment. Other interesting behavior that you can do with this, just start looking at obfuscation. Nothing, like I said before, should be obfuscated in your environment unless like you've got like a rogue coder going on or something occurring that's very weird. Some of the arguments you can look at, there's an excellent talk by Daniel Bohannon, kind of goes into this. He did invoke, obfuscation, and a few other tools as well. There's so many variants to this, but you can just start with the basics. A lot of people won't put the effort into like completely obfuscate this or make it ridiculous where you can't read it. You can just look for no profile or no op, just see what occurs within there. And then set execution policy. This is not this is not a security control in any freaking way. All you have to do is type -bypass and you're through this no matter what occurs. So many companies are like, oh, we'll just put that on and we're good to go. No, do script signing, do something else. This will not work. And it's a hell of a good way to search. Like, you can just start, type in -bypass, look in your 4104 logs. If that comes up, I've seen it before in companies where the admins utilize it because they didn't configure it appropriately, but generally in most environments when you pull that up and that occurs, it's something bad. It's not gonna be anything good. And then the other thing with this too is you can also, if you have 4688 involved, like the process creation, and you're starting to look at like the command lines, like one of the awesome things you can start to do with that is you can break those command lines down, maybe just throw them out into an Excel and look at the file names that are being executed. Like it may not be, just a basic PowerShell. It might not be like Bob's PowerShell.ps1. Like you're gonna see blobs like this because they auto-generate them. It's not gonna be something named normally. So that might be another really good giveaway right there. All right, module logging. So this is the one, if you have volume issues, do not enable this. It's not as robust as script block logging. In my opinion, it's useful, but it's not as useful. If you have the volume, do both. You can do that. So it's pretty much pipeline execution details, get a little bit of the variable initialization. The problem with this one is though, you will not always get the full script. So you're gonna get pieces of the script and you're not gonna really understand kind of probably everything that's occurring. That's why I always say go with script block logging. It just works much, much better that way. All right, setup, group policy, configuration. So this is one of the use cases where I do utilize it for PowerShell remoting. So you've like enter PS session, you can utilize invoke WMI, and you have invoke command. So when PowerShell's pretty much using remoting, you have to utilize WinRM for this, which if any system administrator in your environment is using PowerShell, WinRM is enabled already. So you're gonna see probably some of these commands, they may be just an administrator doing his job, or it may be something malicious. But what you can see at the top is, I think it's like the very top, you see like enter PS session. So sometimes what I'll do with this is just, if I find like an interesting commandlet or argument that's run, I'll search this first and see if there's any hits, and then I'll go into script block logging 4104 and pull down the actual information that I'm interested in. So here's another example. This is still the same, Empire Stager. This is kind of what you're gonna see. It's not as robust. You're gonna get partially, I think most of the blob on this one you'll get, but not everything in there. Okay. So those are all of the Windows logs that most people do not have enabled. That's the stuff that you need to enable in your environment. I'm telling you right now, like it could save a lot of money from a very expensive EDR solution. If you're a smaller or mid-sized company, turn those on first. You can find persistence that way. You can find a lot of bad that way before you move up. So basic threat hunting strategies with this stuff, once you have it, I do a mix of like statistical analysis and then data analysis. So one of like the biggest things is everyone's like, oh, you've got to baseline your entire environment. Well, that's a lot of work. Most people don't do that. So you can sort a lot of this stuff. If you look at like all the command lines that are being run in your environment or all the scheduled tasks, the highest numbered ones, those are going to be allowed. That's probably going to be on every system in your environment, which is why it has the highest count. All the way down to, maybe like halfway in that list, that's probably your baseline for the most part in your environment. Then you have your outliers at the bottom that are like one-offs, two-offs. Those are the ones you start looking at immediately. That's the stuff where it's like, that probably shouldn't be here. It might be interesting, but that's where you're gonna go with it. So there's a lot you can do with this. You can do visualization as well. Like if you have like a Tableau license or something, you can throw all of these weird logs into that and visualize the data. If that works for you, instead of staring at Splunk, looking at a white list the whole day, you can look at blobs that are color-coded and very interesting. I've pulled information out of this, especially with a SOC, where you have a very large enterprise SOC that's maybe spread across a couple of different countries, And say you take a look at like IP scanning, like SOC's always like, nothing got through, closed it. If you take all of the IP scanning for a month from all of those SOC analysts and you put it into a visualization, you might start to bubble up and say like, hey, this IP range is hitting that country, this country, this country at certain times and dates. But you're not gonna see that when every single person's closing stuff and they're not really communicating as to what they're closing. Like your very basic alerts can turn into very powerful information. And then OSINT. Greg had mentioned this before, you can still do this kind of stuff. Read a threat report. AT&T Cybersecurity, which bought Alien Vault, OTX is still free. I hope for a lot longer, but we'll see. Virus Total, you can go to intelligence and get tons of information out of that. Research Lab, like your home, your office, whatever you guys like play around with, run tools, capture these logs, start trying to check that stuff at work. And then Twitter, you can get a ton of information from that. So this is just super quick. This is Apache Zeppelin, so it's open source. This is kind of one of the ways that we hunt with all of our data. We throw it into here, put this on top. You can do SQL, Spark SQL, Python, etc., whatever language you like. This is a super basic SQL query, and I was just doing what I told you guys. I was counting all of the command lines in a month. Actually, no, I was doing one day because of the data size, and just looking. So I went immediately to the bottom to the one-offs, and I'm just scrolling up, looking at those and seeing if there's anything interesting. And you immediately have the PowerShell with like Windows style hidden, et cetera, and you know that's not going to be good. But this is one way that you can do it, and you can do this with so much data. It doesn't have to be, command lines. You can do it with logging, account creation, et cetera. You can do it with a lot of stuff. So here's another one. This one is pretty much service name, doing the same thing, looking at services that are common within the systems in your environment. And if you do this, this is a really good way as well to baseline the services that are acceptable within your company. And then you're gonna start to see at the bottom when you start going towards those outliers, those anomalies that are down there, you're gonna start seeing weird names. So you can see like the SBC host sys doesn't really match. The other ones are numbered as well. I'm not sure why, but it stands out. It's something to look into. You can dig into that if you have the logging. Here's another one as well. So this one is just what I told you guys. Just start basic. You don't have to go immediately and write this crazy freaking regex that's gonna match everything in the world. Just start with bypass. Look at that. Like, is anyone running that in your environment? Okay, I gotta go talk to Bob because he's running bypass every time he does like a GPO push or something like that. You're still gonna find bad stuff. You're still probably gonna find stuff that's occurring within your environment that's expected. But this could also be a talking point to be like, hey, we need to do a little bit more security around PowerShell if people are running this. And then the last one, this is like the funniest thing because you would never expect this to actually occur in an environment, but it does. Sometimes people are super freaking lazy and they won't rename Mimikatz. This happens, like, I will go into an environment that's brand new and still run this every time because you never know. Like, you can really just pull one out and be like, oh, that was awesome. Put a little work in next time. But yeah, it's the same kind of principle. Start very basic. Like, even if you feel like uncomfortable, like, this should probably never happen. You never know. Like, you can get a win out of the most basic search terms in here. All right, man.
Thanks, Brian. So one of the things that we wanted to get to that we never ended up being able to put together for this presentation is a little demonstration and some open source tool information. So as a poor substitute, we just threw this slide in. When it comes to Windows systems, OS Query, WinLog, Beat, and Sysmon, in addition to just native Windows OS logging, those are some good tools that you might want to go out and take a look at. And then we've got tools that also support the analysis of data. So we talked a lot about how you go about hunting, what you can find in all these Windows logs that Brian went through, and we just kind of waved our hand and basically said, yeah, you've got access to all these logs, and you've got some platform where you can query these logs and do the Apache Zeppelin kind of analytics and things like that. But there is some work that goes into setting up those environments. So open source, Helk, Hunter, those are some great platforms to go off and take a look at, and we'll give you an environment, sort of a complete all-in-one package, and some really great work that those guys have done in the community and around the open source threat hunting world. So just some things to take a look at. So just wrapping things up, hopefully you got something out of this presentation. When it comes to getting started with threat hunting, if you're not doing it already, Windows logs are a great place to start. Obviously, you've got to have, when it comes to building a program, people, process, technology, right? So it comes to look at the people. You got to have analysts that actually know how to do this. Analysts that can dedicate time to it. It's not something that you can just take, 30 minutes a day and try and accomplish in any sort of effective manner. So wrap some analysts around it, spend some time on it, and you'll really see a return there. Make sure you follow the process. Grab some data, start with Windows logs, easy place, and leverage some sort of platform, starting maybe with open source just to get your hands dirty. And with that, thank you very much for attending. Appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, we'll be sticking around. You can ask us now. We got a couple minutes, or just catch us afterwards.